Think about the last time you wanted to criticize someone. Really go there for a second. There was this intense energy rising in your chest. There was this feeling to point at them and say exactly what they did wrong, clearly, precisely, and undeniably, in a way that would get into their thick head and finally make them understand. And in that moment, it almost felt necessary, like they genuinely needed to hear this. Like if you just said it loud enough and right enough, something would click for them and they'd stop making the same mistakes. Now, let's flip the scenario. Think about the last time someone criticized you. Not advised you, not helped you, criticized you. Maybe they said, "You are lazy. You always mess things up. You don't think properly." What happened next? Did you sit with it and think, "They're right, I need to change"? Or did something inside you rise up? That immediate urge to explain yourself, justify yourself, defend what you did, even if, somewhere deep down, you knew they had a point. That reaction, that instinct, that's where this whole understanding of criticism begins. Part 2. The truth about criticism. Here's something most people don't realize. Almost no one, 99 times out of 100, ever truly criticizes themselves. No matter how wrong they are, there's always a reason, an explanation, a context that makes the behavior feel justified from the inside. So when someone gets criticized, they don't think, "They're right, let me improve." They think, "You don't understand my situation." Maybe they don't say it out loud, but they feel it. And that is exactly what Dale Carnegie understood so deeply in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Criticism doesn't change people. What it actually does, almost every time, is push them into defense mode. But to really understand why this happens, not just accept it, let's go one level deeper. Part 3. What's actually happening in the brain? In 2019, psychological research looked at the number of people who struggle to admit their mistakes. The scientific community produced several studies and analyses, and what they found, the reason for the behavior, is shocking. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't stupidity, it was fear. The study concluded that avoiding criticism isn't because of confidence. It is a defense mechanism, the mind's way of protecting a person's sense of self-worth. The researchers found that most people unconsciously connect being wrong with being rejected, with losing respect, with damaging how they see themselves. And this reveals something crucial. Criticism doesn't just target what someone did, it targets who they are. When you tell someone you're careless, their brain doesn't process that as "my action needs adjustment." It processes it as "there is something wrong with me as a person." And the moment that happens, the brain has one priority: not reflection, not growth, not change, defense. The person might go quiet, they might nod, they might even say, "You're right." But internally, they are doing the opposite of changing. They're collecting evidence against you, waiting for the moment they can feel right again. You didn't reach them, you didn't help them, you made them your opponent. Now here's the part that makes this even harder to accept. Dale Carnegie writes about interviews with some of the most dangerous criminals of his era, men who had robbed, hurt, and killed. And when asked to reflect on themselves, almost none of them believed they were bad people. One said something like, "I spent my whole life giving people a good time, and this is how I get treated?" Another saw himself as a victim of circumstances. These are people society had essentially labeled as examples of human failure. And yet, in their own minds, they were justified, they were misunderstood, They were the ones who'd been wronged. So if criticism can't crack through that, what exactly is it going to do to an average human in your life who keeps making mistakes? Part 4. The lesson Lincoln almost died to learn. The person who perhaps understood this lesson most deeply is someone you wouldn't expect. Abraham Lincoln, one of the most admired leaders in history, remembered for his patience, his empathy, his ability to hold people together through impossible circumstances. But Lincoln wasn't born that way. When he was young, Lincoln had a razor-sharp wit, and he used it like a weapon. He didn't just criticize people, he mocked them. He wrote letters and poems ridiculing public figures, then dropped them on country roads where they'd definitely be found. Clever, cunning, and completely unchecked. Until one day in 1842, it put him in a life-threatening situation. There was a politician named James Shields, the state auditor of Illinois. Shields had issued a ruling that people could no longer pay their taxes with local paper money. It made him the most hated man in the region, and Lincoln saw a perfect target. Writing anonymously under the name Rebecca, Lincoln published a series of devastating letters in the Sangamo Journal. He didn't just go after Shields's policies, he mocked his vanity, his awkwardness, his embarrassing attempts to impress women. Then Lincoln's fiancée, Mary Todd, joined in, writing letters even sharper than his, pushing Shields further and further over the edge. When Shields finally discovered who was behind it, he was livid. He tracked Lincoln down, demanded a retraction. Lincoln's half-hearted apology only made things worse. And so Shields, following the customs of the era, did what men did. He challenged Lincoln to a duel. Suddenly, Abraham Lincoln, future President of the United States, found himself standing on a sandbar in the Mississippi River, sword in hand, preparing to fight to the death. Because of criticism. However, the duel was stopped at the last moment, but Lincoln never forgot it. The incident embarrassed him so much that he rarely spoke of it afterward. But that sandbar taught him something he never unlearned. Humiliation doesn't persuade people, it provokes them. Criticism doesn't change minds, it creates enemies. The Lincoln history remembers the one who kept his composure, who appointed his rivals to his own cabinet, who wrote furious letters and then locked them in a drawer and never sent them. That Lincoln was built, in part, from what he learned that day. Part 5. What happens in everyday life? Now bring this down to something familiar. Think about someone you've tried to change through criticism. A friend who keeps talking about improving but never does. A partner you've told the same thing to a dozen times. A co-worker who keeps making the same error. A family member who just doesn't seem to hear you. The reasoning is always, if I just explain it clearly enough, they'll get it. But here's what actually happens. They explain themselves back. They defend their choices. They go quiet and withdraw, or they push back. And slowly, without either side fully noticing, a little more distance builds between you. The relationship gets a little colder, a little harder. Not because that person is impossible, not because they don't care, but because criticism doesn't land on behavior, it lands on identity. It doesn't say, that action was wrong. It says, there is something wrong with you. And when a person's sense of self comes under attack, the last thing they're thinking about is how to improve. They're thinking about how to survive the conversation. Part 6. The mirror. Here's where it gets uncomfortable, because everything described before, the defensiveness, the justifications, the inner resistance, doesn't just apply to other people. When someone criticizes us, even we do the same things. The first instinct isn't curiosity, it isn't reflection, it's defense. Suddenly, everything they don't know about us comes rushing to our mind. the context, the reasons, the pressure that was there that they never asked about. And before long, their criticism stops feeling like feedback and starts feeling like an attack. This isn't a personal failing. This is the mind doing exactly what it's built to do when identity feels threatened. It happens to the most self-aware, emotionally intelligent, patient people, because it's not a flaw in character, it's a feature of being human. Which means when the person being criticized goes into that same mode, they're not being difficult, they're being exactly what we all are. So if this is the near universal response to criticism, if it makes people defensive, damages relationships, and almost never produces the change we're actually looking for, then what does work? Part 7. What actually works? Dale Carnegie's answer in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, is simple to say and genuinely difficult to do. Instead of criticizing, try to understand. Instead of leading with what's wrong, lead with curiosity. Acknowledge what the other person is carrying. Make them feel genuinely seen as a person, not just identified as a problem. Because when people feel understood, something shifts. The defensiveness softens. That constant need to prove themselves fades. And for the first time, they can look at their own behavior honestly, because they're no longer spending all their energy protecting themselves. That is the only moment real change becomes possible. Not through force, through safety. The practical difference can be surprisingly small. Instead of, "You're always late," try, "Things have been off schedule lately. Is everything okay?" Instead of, "You're being dramatic," try, "This seems really important to you." Instead of, "Why are you so sensitive?" try, "I didn't realize that hurt you." Same concern, same underlying message, but one puts the person on trial, the other opens a door. One creates an opponent, the other creates a conversation. This is where real influence begins, not by pushing people toward change, but by creating conditions where change can happen naturally. There's something worth being honest about here. Understanding people is genuinely harder than criticizing them. It takes patience. It takes setting aside the need to be right in this moment for the sake of the outcome. And criticism, let's be honest, gives something real in return. It feels like clarity, like truth, like being the person who sees what others are missing. That rush of energy at the start, the satisfaction of finally saying it, that's real. It's not nothing. Understanding asks for something different. It asks for stepping back from that feeling, for caring more about what actually happens than about being right. And if we're being fully honest, a lot of the time, criticism has less to do with wanting the other person to grow and more to do with wanting to feel a little more in control of a situation, a little more powerful, a little more certain in a moment that feels uncertain. That's not a character flaw, it's human nature. But it's worth seeing clearly, because once it's visible, it can be chosen differently. Part 9. The question. So the next time that urge comes, that heat, that clarity, that feeling of "now is when I say it," try pausing for just a moment and ask one question. Is the goal to be right, or is the goal to actually make a difference? Because both can feel the same in the moment, but they lead somewhere very different. Lincoln faced this kind of temptation constantly during the Civil War. He was surrounded by pressure, betrayal, failure, and men who disappointed him constantly. There were nights when he would sit alone at his desk, take out a pen, and begin writing letters to the people who had failed him. Not polite letters, real letters. Letters filled with frustration, sharp disappointment. Every criticism he wanted to unleash in that moment. You can almost imagine the sound of the pen scratching across the paper, as all that anger finally found somewhere to go. And when he was done, He would fold the letter carefully, place it into an envelope, write the person's name on the front, and then stop. He would often let the letter sit, rather than send it immediately. Because Lincoln understood something dangerous about human emotion. The feeling that says, "I need to say this right now," is often the exact feeling you should not trust. And by the next morning, something had usually changed. The heat was gone. The certainty had softened. The urge to wound no longer felt wise. Being right might win the argument, but it almost always costs the relationship, slowly and quietly. People don't change when they feel attacked. They change when they feel understood. This is the core of what Carnegie was pointing to, that real influence has nothing to do with being the most accurate person in the room. It has everything to do with making people feel safe enough to look at themselves honestly. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. And if you found this helpful, if it made you look differently at the people and the world around you, give a like to this video and click subscribe for more. See you in the next one.